What is the craziest story that ever happened to you but nobody ever believes? Story 1. In math class when I was 12 years old, our teacher noticed his watch had stopped. It messed up the timing of our class since he didn't realize how close to the end of our hour he was. The next day, he didn't come to school and we had a replacement lesson. When he came back a few days later, it turned out his dad had died unexpectedly, exactly at the time the watch had stopped. Story 2. I've never told it, because it's stupid to begin with. But when I was 12 years old, my cousin gave me some throwing knives he picked up from a flea market. I was anxious to use them but had to wait for my parents to leave. Once I had my opportunity, one went downstairs in our unfinished basement where I had a dartboard set up against a slab of particle board leaning up against the wall. From about 10 feet away, on my first try, I stuck all 3 throwing knives, back to back, smack, on the bullseye. Pretty anticlimactic amongst the other stories, but for 12-year-old me I felt like a bucking ninja assassin. But who could I tell? Who would have believed 12-year-old Greg? I'm 30 years old now. Thanks for the feels. Story 3. When I was in middle school I had a dream that I was in one of our school hallways where my cousin's dog was just sitting there. She was sort of wispy, bluish in color, and a bit transparent. The dog ran up to me. I remember I was able to give her a hug and pet her, told her she was a good dog, etc. She then ran down the hallway, and I felt a bit saddened. I woke up the next morning and found out that the dog had died the prior evening. Still spooks me a bit. Story 4. No one ever actually said that they didn't believe me, but when I tell the story, I can see the skepticism in their eyes. I was on a trip to Disneyland and I was riding a roller coaster when the thing on my shoulders, that was supposed to protect me, got loose and moved 40 to 50 centimeters, I think that's 5 feet, away from my body. With crazy reflexes I moved it close to my body again and it clicked perfectly this time. The rest of the ride was a nightmare. I almost cried when it was done. I believe it was called Space Mountain Mission 2 if anyone is interested. Story 5. When I was around 8 years old I went on my first upside down ride. I was very tall for my age, but I hadn't broadened out just yet. Anyway, I go on this giant pirate ship that goes all the way around, like a pendulum. There are 4 carts, all of which hold around 20 people, with a cage over the top. To cut a long story short, while we were being held upside down I slipped out of my seat and was flying around within the cage, scared shitless. They stopped the ride after around 10 seconds of me trying my hardest to hold onto the outer cage so I don't slip out toward my death. They brought me back down and I didn't speak for the rest of the day and I went completely white for around an hour. I'd been on every roller coaster in the UK since, but I'll be bucked if I ever step foot on an upside down pirate ship again. Story 6. I met Christian Bale on Omegle. He was wearing just a pair of boxers. We had a 40-minute discussion on Dark Side of the Moon. I swear to you, this happened. Story 7. When I was in 4th grade, I stole chocolate bars from the local food mart and went to go sell it in these sketchy apartments. I lived in downtown Toronto at this time and when I went to knock on this one door, a black guy with a bucking ninja samurai sword came out and said, "What you want?" I pissed my pants and ran. Story 8. Growing up in my hometown there wasn't much for teenagers to do, so naturally my friends and I got most of our kicks from drugs and partying. One night my buddy and I had bought an eighth of mushrooms and decided we were gonna eat them and walk from my end of town to his girlfriend's house, which was about a 3-hour walk. We had nothing better to do that night and thought, bucket, at least we'll have some fun tripping out. We ate the shrooms after we got something to drink at Sonic and decided to order 2 cheeseburgers to carry with us in case we got the munchies later. So we started our adventure slowly, taking our time walking around town, and ended up in this small park. It's around 10 p.m. or so and we decide to stop and smoke a few bowls since we were starting to feel the shrooms kick in. By the time we finished our second bowl we were definitely well under the effects of everything and having a good time. This is where things started to get weird. We were sitting there laughing when this black dog walks up out of bucking nowhere and sits down next to us. Naturally we pet it and it's super friendly with us, so we decide that we should give him our cheeseburgers because he seems so cool. We unwrap the food and give it to him, and he's ecstatic about it at this point. Once he finishes the burgers, he slowly starts to walk away, and my buddy suggests that we should just follow the dog and see where it takes us. Being under the influence like I was, this seemed like an awesome idea, and we begin following this dog around, completely forgetting his girlfriend was waiting for us to come over. After about 4 to 5 hours of following this dog around with the occasional stops to stare at the patterns on the sidewalk or just lay down in the grass, we end up on the side of town known as 7th Street. This is the neighborhood which my buddy's girlfriend lived in, and I had this realization that maybe the dog was leading us to his girlfriend. Naturally, I laughed at the thought and brushed it off as being too crazy, even for my high ass. No shit, 15 minutes later this dog runs up a driveway in this neighborhood and I hear a girl say, "What the buck? Where did you come from?" I instantly recognize the voice and yell, "Marissa." Sure as shit, my buddy's girl comes walking down her driveway with this dog. She had been outside smoking and the dog had ran straight up to her. This bucking dog led us all the way across town straight to Marissa's house like it was our canine guide or something. My buddy asked if she knew the dog or if it was a neighbor's, and she said that she had never seen it before. To this day it still blows my mind that this even happened. After that we went to another buddy's house and left the dog at her house, but it was gone when she came home the next day. I still wonder what happened to that dog from time to time. Anytime I tell people this story, they say I was just high on shrooms and that I imagined, but I know how to handle my trips, and that dog was real. Definitely one of the weirder things to happen to my buddy and I during our drug days. TLDR, ate mushrooms, met a mystical guide dog. Story 9. My friend and I were returning home from the bar years ago. There was a police helicopter circling above and we decided that it would be fun to run and act suspiciously. We were drunk, and after a few minutes of sporadic sprinting, shimmying along walls, crawling under cars and swan diving into shrubs, we forgot about our stupid ruse. We continued home in our drunken stupor. We were standing on the porch and my friend was fumbling for his keys. All of a sudden a Crown Victoria with lights flashing, sirens screaming, did a Hollywood power slide around the corner and accelerated briefly before plowing on the brakes and coming to an abrupt stop in front of us. Simultaneously, the aforementioned helicopter, our city only has one, was above us, spotlight beaming on the porch. We, still very drunk, watched this unfold in awe, uttering things like "buck and sweet" and "holy shit, it worked." The cops in the cruiser screamed instructions at us. We were so incredulous that we started to laugh. Hard. Full-on gut-busting laughter. We were in disbelief. The cops were not too pleased initially, and we thought we might end up in the drunk tank. We got off with a warning, and it was suggested we stop being so bucking stupid. By the time they drove off, the cops were shaking their heads, and both had smiles on their faces. True story, but unless my friend is with me to confirm the details, people have a hard time buying it. Story 10. Long story. TLDR at the end. My mother has told me this story once and won't tell it ever again because it freaks her out too much to even think about, but this is her unbelievable story. She was in college in Texas in the late 80s and her and some friends went on a haunted prison tour around Halloween time. At some point during the tour they broke off and went to play around with a Ouija board. None of them bought into the whole demon/spirit stuff, so why not, right? She says 3 specific questions they asked and their answers freaked them the buck out. First was, are there demons here? The cursor went to yes. Second was, what happened here? The cursor spelled out the answer, death. Third was, who are you? She said the cursor moved to spell out Lucifer. After that, she said they left the area they were in and caught up to the tour group. This is where it gets chilling. She said that one of her friends, let's call him Dave, that was with them, started being oddly interested in every story the tour guide told of the prison, asking her, the guide, questions like, how did they die, how many people died? Pretty much wanting to know all the creepy details of the deaths and shit that went on. So the tour came to an end and they were allowed to roam around for a little while and Dave went off by himself. Everyone was ready to leave but had to find Dave. They found him sitting at the place they had used the Ouija board. Just sitting there staring at the wall. One of them said, come on, let's go, Dave. He replied, no. I want to stay here. I like it here. They finally got him to come with them to the car and left. All the while they were on the way back to college, he was acting not himself, asking questions about demons and the devil and such. And specifically asked, "Do you believe in hell?" Everyone replied no, as they were all, including Dave, atheists. Dave said, "In what my mom says to be the most satanic voice you'll ever hear, well you should, that's where you're all going, followed by you're all going to be dead soon." Obviously freaked the buck out by this point, they rush back to their dorm and the two guys Dave and John don't go to their room so John can snap Dave out of it, come back to reality. Gets him settled down and everything seemingly back to normal, and then met up with my mom and her roommate, who also went to the prison, in their room. So they're hanging out doing college kid things and Dave steps out to go to the bathroom and John suggests he go with Dave. Dave says, "No, I'm okay, I feel alright now." So he goes, and about 10 minutes later, my mom claims the room they were hanging out in started shaking, pictures fell off the wall, lamp fell off the desk. Now in Texas it's unlikely that it was an earthquake, so John and my mother go out into the hall to check to see if anyone else felt it from the other rooms. But no one was in panic, everyone was still in their rooms, except Dave was standing in the middle of the hall, a few doors down from where my mom and John emerged, motionless, staring into oblivion, as my mother described it. John approached him telling my mom to stay back. He said, "Dave, what are you doing?" My mom says he said in the same demonic voice as before, "Dave isn't here anymore, he's mine now." Then John went into a rage and beat the shit out Dave, all while Dave is laughing the most evil laugh. And then Dave comes to and says, "Why are hitting me?" And starts bawling his eyes out. My mom said she'd never seen anyone cry so hard and have such terror in their eyes. And ever since my mom has been an avid Christian and churchgoer every Sunday and Wednesday. TLDR, mom and friends go to haunted prison, play with Ouija board and demonic possession ensues. Sorry if my storytelling isn't the greatest. If you made it this far, please consider pressing the subscribe and like button. Now continue to the video. Story 11. Not too crazy, but, in my old work staff room I hit 3 bullseyes with 3 darts. A few years later I got a royal flush in a staff poker game. Telling new people at work that I got a royal flush and hit 3 bullseyes in this room, everyone just thought I was that cunt. Story 12. One time we convinced this kid to watch some 30-minute long video on YouTube that would hypnotize you and put you in a trance. Eventually, his head was on his desk, and he seemed to be in a pretty deep trance. So my friend took out the kid's headphone and said in a soothing voice, "When you hear the word duck, you will say quack quack, and when you hear the name insert name of other friend, you will laugh hysterically." We thought little of it, as we were just playing around, and left him to sleep. Eventually, our teacher came back. We were supposed to have a substitute the entire class, so we shook him awake. He seemed really dazed, but we didn't say anything to him other than that the teacher was back. At some point in the next couple minutes, the teacher said insert other friend's name here, and the kid started laughing hysterically. I mean, he was banging his head on the wall. Everybody looked at him like he was stupid, and then he started saying, "Make it stop." The kid was strange anyway, and he quit laughing after about 30 seconds, so most people paid little attention to it. Now that we realized what we had done, we said duck, and, with a completely straight face, the kid casually goes quack quack, without sounding like a duck or anything. We start asking him questions, and he doesn't know where he is or anything. We tormented him for a bit, and then he asked to go to the bathroom. We told him not to, but he left anyway. Well, the kid didn't come back for the rest of class, and apparently, after talking to him later, he woke up in some random hallway, in the middle of the next block. Only the 5 people or so who were in on it with us actually believed it, although more people did after we saw a hypnotism show later that year. TLDR, we told a kid to do stupid stuff while he was hypnotized. Story 13. I was at King's Dominion with my friend Michael and we were on the Anaconda, which is a roller coaster with a barrel roll. We went on it, and during the barrel roll my phone started to fall out my pocket and I caught it mid-air in the barrel roll. That was 6 years ago. He still doesn't believe me. It drives me bucking nuts. Story 14. Saw an actual sword fight in Morocco. Me and my friend on an Arabic language immersion had gone to Fez with the class for the weekend. We got up earlier than everyone and went to a cafe to get iced almond milk because the teacher kept saying it was the shit. It was indeed the shit. I was finishing my glass when two dudes with swords ran into this mostly empty parking lot and threw a couple swings at each other. Their gangs came to back them up, throwing rocks at each other and shouting insults at each other. Our broken skills with the local dialect could pick out one word, "Woomik, your mother." The one swordsman who'd been on the defensive and backing up most of the time, ran on top of a rusting VW bug in the lot, pointed his sword at the other guy, and shouted something. No idea what he said, but it was quite dramatic. He laughed along with his boys and then they ran through a side alley while the rest just threw rocks and then walked the other way, still disgruntled. The server just walked up to me and asked if I wanted more almond milk, like welcome to Morocco, this is Saturday morning for you, business as usual. To this day no one in our class, or anyone for that matter believes us, but it's nice to have one other person who knows the truth. Story 15. Me and my friends were out exploring one night a few years back. The one person with us worked on the movie Bereavement and did the landscaping and set up the places the film was filmed at. One of these locations was an abandoned slaughterhouse. We go in and nothing has really changed since the last few times we went there. Still the same creepy place as it has always been. But then we noticed the abandoned house next to it, which I alone explored a few years later, still had a light on in one of its windows. That creeped us out. We went on exploring and decided to go into the barn next to the slaughterhouse. We went in and saw blood on the walls, which did bother us because a horror movie was filmed there. And went on searching. Then we got to the place where the animals probably would have been kept. All of our jaws dropped at what we saw. We immediately ran outside and debated on whether or not to report the body bags to the police anonymously or go back in, open up, and find out for ourselves. After a 10-minute debate, half of us went back and the other half positioned the car for a quick exit if shit got bad. We got back in there, all crowded around the pile of bodies wrapped in bedsheets with ropes tied around the neck and ankles. The oldest one slowly approaches with scissors and cuts away, revealing the biggest letdown of my life. It was just hay all along, wrapped up in a bed sheet. Looked exactly like bodies in the fetal position though. We leave and I notice, we all probably noticed, that the light in the house had been turned off. None of us said anything about that though, however we all noticed it. Story 16. In my uni halls in first year, there was a Muslim girl who had an American boyfriend who she may have met online, but that bit's kinda irrelevant. Anyway, she was in the flat opposite across a small hallway and her boyfriend had come to stay for a month. He seemed like a nice guy, nothing too out of the ordinary. Anyway, one night me and my one flatmate who was in at the time were minding our own business when suddenly there was a loud knock at the door. Said flatmate went to open the door and there were 5 armed policemen. In the UK this isn't a common sight, asking if we knew of an American staying in the other flat. We said we did and we had to describe the layout of the flat. We were ordered to turn off all text key lights whilst the police barged down the door of the flat, hilariously was open and on the latch, all whilst we watched through the peephole. The girl and her boyfriend took, I'm not even exaggerating, about 5 minutes to appear despite all the commotion. They brought this boyfriend out literally with 4 guns pointing to his head and radioed that they had the suspect detained at gunpoint. It was such a bizarre and surreal experience. The reason behind it all is that the boyfriend's dad didn't like the fact his son was dating a Muslim, so somehow from America phoned the British police and said he was armed and dangerous or something along those lines. It still irks me to this day, the way they took ages to come out despite the police shouting police repeatedly, and there was never really a chance to find out the full tale. There were about 6 police vehicles in the driveway and people were talking about it for ages, but me and my flatmate had front row seats. Story 17. When I was at a lawn party at my friend's house, I was awake while everyone was sleeping. I know I was awake, since I was instructed by the other guys to keep a watch on the League of Legends servers since they were down, because I was awake anyway. I heard a guitar play 3 times. I clearly heard it, and I was scared shitless. There was no one in the house, other than us. It could not have been from an electronic device of some sort, it was just 3 subtle strokes over a guitar's strings. Yeah. My buddies didn't believe that. Story 18. I posted this in a 2-day-old thread at like 3 in the morning, so it didn't get many views, but here it is. My name is Dan, and this is the story of Gigantosciticus. I took a huge stinking shit at the summer camp I had just started attending, and I was like 13, so I thought that I'd brag to all the guys about my it. I named it Gigantosciticus, and that name didn't even do justice to my fecal child. It was easily 13 inches long and was a little less thick than an Arizona iced tea can. To somebody who was 13, this was like a blessing from God. Imagine how cool my bunkmates would think I was when I showed them the shit to end all shits. I was ecstatic. I rolled on the ground to the stall next to me, while my pants weren't on and I had a dirty ass. I didn't want the teepee to cover up my magnificent baby after all. So I shimmy into the other stall and start wiping. I wasn't really focused on anything but wiping and then gathering my friends for a show and tell, so the thought of locking the stall I was currently in slipped my mind. So I had no pants on, I was giggling because I was so excited, and I was wiping my ass in an unlocked stall. Not the best situation to be in. Luckily, I finished my wipe and decided to slide back under stall walls to the original Holy Land. I bear crawled about halfway into the other stall when I heard the door that takes you into the bathroom open. I was dead still because I didn't want anyone to get suspicious and start snooping around. I watched with bated breath as the pair of size 11 boots made their way across the floor towards the stalls. I recognized those work boots. They belonged to a big dumb farm boy named Nash. Nash was really big, really dumb, and really didn't like me. It felt like an eternity as he did his big dumb shuffle across the line of stalls. He finally was out of my vision and all I could do was pray. His footsteps stopped somewhere near the stall I was half out of, and I hear the creaking of a stall door. Nash had gone into the stall next to the one I was climbing out of. Nash took a shit that I'm sure rivaled mine, seeing as half the food budget at camp was labeled for Nash. I was starting to get really uncomfortable laying on the ground, so I decided I could risk slowly crawling back into Gigantosciticus' holding pen. I started my methodical slither when the bathroom door opened again. "Hey Nash, you in here?" asked a camper named Tim. Tim was Nash's friend, and him and I met before. "Yeah," Nash replied, "I'm in the handicap stall at the end." I was praying Tim wasn't going to take up the stall closest to Nash, because that was the one with my white ass sticking up in it. Then Nash said something that made my heart drop like the shit I had just pinched out. "I wouldn't take the stall next to me though. Dan is bare-ass naked and on the floor in there." Nash knew. He must have either opened my door and saw my booty, or looked underneath his stall and saw my gooch. I was dumbfounded and felt like a total idiot. I started wiggling my way back when Tim came over and opened the stall door. I got most of my ass on the other side of the stall wall, but Tim saw enough. Tim immediately went out to tell everybody about how I was dragging my D on the tiles with no pants on, and by the time I got dressed, a dozen older campers were trying to come in and see what was up. The head counselor Brian also came in to investigate, and he was waiting outside my stall as I opened it. I didn't bother to flush down my loaf, because I still wanted to salvage as much of this as I could. That backfired almost immediately, because as soon as Brian was finished looking at me, his eyes wandered to my tennis ball tube shit. The only word that gives his reaction any justice is flabbergasted. After getting his bearing, he told me to flush my shit, wash up, and meet him at the camp main office. That sounds doable, right? Wrong. Gigantosciticus lived up to his name, and as the father of all other shits, a mere camp toilet bowl wouldn't bring him down. I flushed and flushed and flushed, but all the turd did was spin around like it was an Olympic ice skater. While this was happening, Brian was shooting dagger with his eyes, and the rest of the campers who could see were either laughing at me or in awe of my shit. Eventually Brian handed me a pair of medical gloves from the supply cabinet and simply said pick it up. I was hesitant, but I really didn't see any other option. The shit was pretty solid, and I cradled it like a child as Brian led me to the supply shed. I have never been so embarrassed in my life. Some of the guys thought it was hysterical, but almost everybody else, including the girl campers, were absolutely disgusted. Brian got a shovel and dug a little hole about 10 yards deep into the woods next to the supply shed. He told me to bury it, and with motherly care, I placed Gigantosciticus in his shallow grave. "Wash up. I expect you to be at the office ASAP," Brian told me. All activity at the camp has stopped at the point, and a solid 150 campers/counselors were just staring at me. I was ashamed, and made my way back to the bathroom with my shit-covered gloves and the reddest face imaginable. I threw out the gloves, washed my hands, and choked back tears. I felt like an idiot. I walked with my head down to the main office, where Brian chewed me out for a solid 15 minutes and told me how stupid I was for thinking it was a good idea to slug my way between stalls with no clothes on. Apparently Tim had told everybody he could find about my pantsless adventure, and all I wanted to do was crawl into a hole and die. My bunkmates thought that was the highlight of the camp year, but all the girls and older campers thought I was a huge moron. I went through the rest of that year having to deal with ridicule and disgusted looks at every turn. When the camp year finally came to an end, I had had enough of the bullshit. I told Tim I hated him and I was crying and made an even bigger fool of myself as I was leaving for my parents' car. All the other parents stopped and stared as this crying little bitch with snot running down his nose stomped towards the car. I never told my parents what happened, because this is quite a long story. I never went back to that camp, but I'm sure everyone will fondly recall the kid who carried a huge shit into the woods. And that, my children, is the most awkward and embarrassing thing I have ever gone through. TLDR: the life and death of Gigantosciticus, and how Tim and Nash saw my bare ass.